What happens when a prince walks onto a late-night show expecting royal treatment but gets hit with hard questions instead? It only took 39 seconds for Prince Harry to completely lose his composure and storm off set in what became the most shocking celebrity meltdown ever caught on camera. But before we break down every jaw-dropping moment, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because we're pulling back the curtain on royalty's dark side. We're exposing entitled celebrities and their shocking behavior the cameras never showed you. We've got the raw footage they don't want you to see, and you won't want to miss a single reveal. And drop a comment below telling us what you think about this absolutely outrageous behavior. Now let's dive into what really happened that night. The studio lights were bright. The audience was packed. Greg Gutfeld sat behind his desk with that signature smirk, ready for another episode. His team had booked a big guest. Prince Harry himself was scheduled to appear. The buzz around the studio was electric. Everyone knew this would be interesting. What they didn't know was just how explosive things were about to become. Harry walked out to polite applause. He was wearing a casual blazer and jeans, the kind of outfit that screams, "I'm just a regular guy." Even though everyone knows he grew up in palaces, he waved to the crowd with this rehearsed smile, the kind of smile that looks friendly but doesn't quite reach the eyes. He sat down across from Greg, adjusting his jacket, clearly expecting this to be another softball interview where he could talk about his latest projects without any pushback. Greg leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "Welcome to the show, Harry. Thanks for joining us." "Thanks for having me," Harry replied, his British accent thick. He settled into his chair like he owned the place. "So," Greg began, flipping through some notes casually, "you've been pretty vocal lately about a lot of issues. Privacy, mental health, the media. All important stuff. But I've got to ask, and I think a lot of our viewers are wondering the same thing, how do you square wanting privacy with doing tell-all interviews and documentaries?" The audience got quiet. You could feel the tension starting to build. This wasn't the question Harry was expecting. His smile flickered for just a second before he recovered. "Well, Greg, I think there's a difference between sharing your truth on your own terms and being hounded by paparazzi who invade every aspect of your life," Harry said, his tone measured but with a slight edge. "What I'm doing is taking control of my own narrative." Greg nodded slowly, but his expression showed he wasn't buying it. Taking control of your narrative. Okay, but isn't doing multiple high-profile interviews and TV shows kind of inviting that attention? I mean, you can't have it both ways, can you? You can't say, "Leave me alone," and then show up on every platform available to talk about your private life. Harry's jaw tightened. Just a little, but enough to notice. "I think you're oversimplifying it." "Am I?" Greg leaned back in his chair, keeping his tone light but his words sharp. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you want the perks of being a celebrity, the platform, the influence, the money from these deals, but none of the scrutiny that comes with it. That's not how it works for the rest of us," the audience murmured. Some people shifted in their seats. This was getting uncomfortable, but in the best way possible. The kind of uncomfortable where you can't look away. Harry's face was starting to flush. "Greg, I don't think you understand what it's like to grow up in the public eye. To have every single moment of your life documented and criticized. To have lies written about you and your family." "You're right," Greg said, spreading his hands. "I don't know what that's like. Most people don't. But most people also don't get to live in mansions and fly private jets and have security details. There's a trade-off there. And it seems like you want all the benefits, but none of the responsibilities." Harry sat forward, his voice rising slightly. "Responsibilities? I've spent my entire life serving. Military service, charity work, trying to make a difference. What more do you want from me?" "I'm not questioning your service," Greg said calmly, which somehow made his words hit harder. "I'm questioning the constant victim narrative. You're one of the most privileged people on the planet. You have resources most people can't even dream of. But every time you get on camera, it's about how hard your life is." The crowd was silent now. Everyone was locked in. This was not how these interviews usually went. Celebrities came on talk shows, expecting friendly banter and promotion. Not this. Harry's face was fully red now. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. "You don't know anything about my life. You don't know what I've been through." "Then enlighten me," Greg said, keeping his cool completely. "But do it without blaming everyone else, because that's the pattern I'm seeing. Your family's to blame. The media's to blame. The British public is to blame. At what point do you look in the mirror and take some accountability?" That did it. That was the breaking point. Harry shot up from his chair. "Accountability? You want to talk about accountability? You sit here in your comfortable little studio making jokes and judging people you know nothing about. You have no idea what it takes to walk away from everything you've ever known, to stand up for what's right even when the whole world is against you." Greg remained seated, unbothered. "I think the whole world isn't against you, Harry. I think you've got millions of supporters. What you don't like is that some people dare to criticize you, and you can't handle it." "I don't have to sit here and listen to this," Harry snapped, his voice getting louder. The professional veneer was completely gone now. This was raw emotion spilling out. "I came here thinking we could have an intelligent conversation, but you're just another talking head trying to tear people down for ratings." The audience gasped. Some people in the crowd looked genuinely shocked. Others were filming on their phones, capturing every second of this meltdown. Greg stayed calm, which only seemed to make Harry more furious. "Harry, I'm asking you legitimate questions. Questions a lot of people have. If you can't answer them without losing your temper, maybe that says more about you than it does about me. You know what?" Harry was pacing now, his hands gesturing wildly. "This is exactly the problem. People like you sit in judgment, acting all high and mighty, when you've never had to deal with a fraction of what I've dealt with. You've never had your mother die because of photographers chasing her car. You've never had every relationship you've ever had picked apart by strangers. You've never had your own family turn their backs on you." Greg finally stood up, but his demeanor remained measured. "You're right about your mother. That was a tragedy. No one disputes that. But Harry, it's been decades. And you're using that trauma as a shield against any criticism. That's not healthy. And it's not fair to everyone else who's experienced loss and managed to move forward without blaming the world." The words hung in the air like a bomb. The studio was dead silent, except for Harry's heavy breathing. Harry pointed a finger at Greg, his hand shaking. "How dare you? How dare you bring my mother into this and tell me how to grieve? You have no right." "I'm not telling you how to grieve," Greg said, his voice still even. "I'm telling you that grief doesn't give you a free pass to act entitled and above criticism. Everyone goes through hard things, but we don't all get book deals and Netflix specials to complain about it." Harry's face twisted into something between rage and disbelief. "You're disgusting. You're absolutely disgusting. This interview is over." "That's your choice," Greg said with a shrug. "But walking away when things get tough? That seems to be your pattern." That line was the final straw. Harry ripped off his microphone, the wire tangling for a moment before he yanked it free. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed through the studio. I'm done with this. With you. With all of it." He turned to storm off, but Greg wasn't finished. "Before you go, Harry, just one more thing. You talk a lot about wanting to help people, about making a difference. But how are you helping anyone by playing the victim? How are you making a difference by running away from your responsibilities and then complaining about it from a mansion in California?" Harry spun around, his face contorted with anger. "My responsibilities? I gave up everything. I walked away from a life of comfort because I wanted something real, something meaningful, and people like you will never understand that because you're too busy tearing others down to build yourselves up." "You didn't walk away from comfort," Greg shot back, his voice rising for the first time. "You walked away from duty, from service, from the responsibilities that came with your position, and then you monetized your family drama. That's not noble, that's not brave, that's just cashing in." The audience was on the edge of their seats. Some were nodding in agreement with Greg. Others looked uncomfortable with how heated this had become. But everyone was watching. Everyone was transfixed. Harry took a step toward Greg's desk, his fists clenched. "You don't get to tell me what's noble. You don't get to define my choices. I left because I was protecting my family, because I saw what that institution did to my mother, and I wasn't going to let it happen to my wife." "Protecting your family," Greg repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Is that what you call airing every piece of dirty laundry on international television? Accusing your family of racism? Making your brother and father out to be villains? That's protection?" Harry's voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through the anger. "They wouldn't protect us. Someone had to speak up. Or maybe," Greg said, leaning on his desk, "maybe you didn't get your way, and this is your revenge tour. Maybe you're upset that you weren't going to be king, that your brother was always going to be ahead of you, and instead of dealing with that like an adult, you're burning it all down and calling it justice." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Harry's mouth opened and closed, struggling to form a response. When he finally spoke, his voice was shaking with rage. "You are the most disrespectful, ignorant person I've ever had the misfortune of meeting. You know nothing. Nothing about me, Nothing about my family. Nothing about what we went through. Then stop going on TV and telling everyone about it. Greg fired back instantly. You can't have it both ways. You can't sell your story to the highest bidder and then get mad when people have opinions about it. That's not how this works. Harry looked around the studio, at the cameras, at the audience, at the crew members watching with wide eyes. He looked like a man who suddenly realized he'd lost complete control of the situation. This is insane. This whole thing is insane. I'm not doing this anymore. No one's forcing you to stay, Greg said simply. But you came here. You agreed to this interview. And now when it gets real, when someone actually challenges you instead of kissing your ring, you can't handle it. Harry shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping. Kissing my ring? Right, because that's what I want. You really don't get it. None of you get it. What don't we get, Harry? Greg pressed. Explain it to us. Use this platform you supposedly care so much about. Tell us what we're missing, because all I see is someone who had everything, gave it up, and now won't stop complaining about the choices he made. I gave it up because it was toxic, Harry said, his voice hoarse now. Because that place, that family, that system, it destroys people. It destroyed my mother. It was destroying me. I left to save myself and my family. And yet, you can't stop talking about it, Greg countered. You can't stop going back to it. If it was so toxic, why are you still obsessed with it? Why do you need everyone to know how much you suffered? People who actually escape toxic situations, they move on. They build new lives. They don't spend years doing interviews about how terrible it was. Harry's hands were shaking visibly now. Because people deserve to know the truth. Because that institution needs to be held accountable. Or because you're bitter, Greg said bluntly. Because you thought you'd leave, and everyone would follow you and sympathize with you. But instead, a lot of people think you abandoned your duty. And you can't stand that. The silence that followed was deafening. Harry stood there, breathing hard, looking like he might actually cry or throw a punch. It was impossible to tell which. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but venomous. I hope you're proud of yourself. I hope this is what you wanted, to humiliate someone on your show for ratings. I didn't humiliate you, Harry, Greg said, sitting back down at his desk. You did that yourself. I just asked questions. Hard questions, sure, but questions that needed to be asked. If you can't answer them without falling apart, that's on you. Harry stood there for another long moment, his chest heaving. Then he turned without another word and walked off the set. His footsteps echoed. A door slammed somewhere backstage. The sound reverberated through the studio. Greg turned to the camera, his expression neutral. Well, folks, I guess we struck a nerve. We were going to talk about his new project, but it seems like accountability isn't really his thing. We'll be right back after this break. The audience erupted into a mix of applause, gasps, and chatter. Some people were on their feet. Others sat in stunned silence. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every reaction. This wasn't just a bad interview. This was a complete meltdown. A prince, someone who'd been trained his entire life to handle public appearances, had completely lost it on live television. All because someone dared to ask him tough questions. All because someone refused to treat him like royalty and instead treated him like any other guest who needed to back up their claims. Greg had remained calm throughout the entire exchange. Professional, pointed yes, but never losing his cool. He didn't raise his voice until Harry started getting aggressive. He didn't attack Harry personally until Harry made it personal. He simply asked the questions that many people had been thinking but were too polite or too intimidated to ask. And Harry couldn't handle it. The man who claims to want honest dialogue, who says he's all about truth and transparency, couldn't handle 15 minutes of real pushback, couldn't handle being challenged on his narrative, couldn't handle someone pointing out the contradictions in his story. The entitlement was breathtaking. The way Harry expected Greg to simply accept everything he said at face value. The way he thought his trauma gave him immunity from criticism. The way he reacted with outrage when treated like everyone else who comes on television to promote themselves and their projects. This is someone who claims to champion mental health and open conversation. But the moment the conversation didn't go his way, he shut down completely. He went from calm to volcanic in minutes. And not because Greg was cruel or unfair, but because Greg refused to play along with the victim narrative. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been clearer. Greg, the host, stayed in control, asked reasonable questions, maintained his composure even when Harry was yelling and pointing fingers. He didn't back down, didn't apologize for asking tough questions, didn't treat Harry with kid gloves just because of his title. Harry, on the other hand, fell apart, got defensive, made excuses, played the victim, brought up his dead mother as a shield against criticism, acted like asking him to explain his contradictions was somehow a personal attack. And when he couldn't win the argument, he ran away. Just like he ran away from his family. Just like he seems to run away from anything that challenges him. The most telling moment was when Harry accused Greg of not understanding his pain, of never having dealt with what he's dealt with, as if loss and trauma and family drama are somehow exclusive to royalty, as if regular people don't experience devastating grief and betrayal and hardship every single day without the resources and platforms that Harry has. Millions of people lose parents. Millions of people have complicated family relationships. Millions of people feel misunderstood and criticized, but they don't get to go on international television and blame everyone else for their problems. They don't get multi-million-dollar deals to tell their side of the story. They get up, go to work, and deal with their issues without the world's attention and sympathy. That's what Greg was getting at. Not that Harry's pain isn't real, but that it doesn't make him special. It doesn't put him above criticism. It doesn't mean everyone has to agree with his choices or approve of how he's handling things. And Harry couldn't accept that. He needed everyone to see him as the hero of his own story, the brave prince who escaped the evil castle. And when Greg refused to play along with that fairy tale, Harry's whole persona crumbled. The anger Harry displayed wasn't righteous indignation. It was wounded pride. It was the rage of someone who's used to people agreeing with him, supporting him, telling him he's right. Someone who surrounds himself with yes men and sympathetic interviewers. Someone who's built an echo chamber, where his version of events is the only version that matters. Greg burst that bubble, popped the carefully constructed image, and Harry couldn't handle it. What made it even worse was how Harry tried to claim the moral high ground, even as he was losing his temper, talking about making a difference and helping people while simultaneously throwing a tantrum because someone asked him hard questions. The hypocrisy was staggering. You want to help people? Start by showing them how to handle criticism with grace, how to have difficult conversations without falling apart, how to disagree with someone without making it personal, how to take accountability for your choices instead of blaming everyone else. But Harry couldn't do any of that. Instead, he showed exactly what Greg was talking about: entitlement, an inability to handle adversity, a tendency to play the victim when things don't go his way, all the things he probably would deny if asked directly, but demonstrated perfectly in his behavior. The way he spoke to Greg at the end, calling him disgusting and disrespectful, showed his true colors. Because Greg wasn't being disrespectful. Tough, yes. Challenging, absolutely. But not disrespectful. He was treating Harry like an adult who should be able to defend his positions and explain his choices. Harry wanted to be treated like a child, protected from hard questions, shielded from criticism, given unconditional support regardless of his actions. And when Greg refused to do that, Harry lashed out like a child who didn't get his way. The worst part is that Harry probably left that studio thinking he was the victim of an ambush, that Greg was unfair to him, that this proved his point about the media being terrible. He'll probably go home and tell everyone how badly he was treated, how he was attacked for no reason, how nobody understands him. He won't reflect on why he couldn't answer simple questions about his contradictions. He won't consider that maybe his constant victim narrative is getting old. He won't think about how his behavior on that show proved every point Greg was making, because that would require self-awareness. That would require humility. That would require admitting that maybe, just maybe, he's not always right. That maybe some of the criticism he receives is valid. That maybe he does have some accountability for how his life has turned out. And based on what we saw in that interview, Harry is incapable of that kind of reflection. He's too wrapped up in his own story, too convinced of his own righteousness, too committed to the narrative that everyone else is wrong and he's the only one who sees the truth. Greg exposed that, not through tricks or gotcha questions, but simply by refusing to accept Harry's version of events without question, by pointing out the obvious contradictions, by asking him to explain himself like any other public figure promoting their projects. And Harry couldn't do it. He melted down. He stormed off. He proved every single thing Greg said about him being entitled and unable to handle real scrutiny. That's what makes this moment so significant. This wasn't just a celebrity having a bad interview. This was a complete mask-off moment where the carefully crafted public image fell away, and we saw who Harry really is underneath all the PR and media training. Someone who talks about wanting dialogue but only on his terms. Someone who preaches compassion but shows none to those who disagree with him. Someone who claims to have grown and evolved but displays the emotional regulation of a teenager. Greg remained the adult in the room throughout the entire encounter. He didn't gloat when Harry left. He didn't mock him or celebrate his departure. He simply stated facts and moved on with his show, professional to the end. That's the difference between them. Greg knows who he is. He's comfortable with criticism. He doesn't need everyone to love him or agree with him. He does his job, asks his questions, and doesn't take it personally when people get upset. Harry, for all his talk of growth and therapy and mental health, couldn't keep it together for one challenging interview. Couldn't separate his emotions from the conversation. Couldn't handle being pushed back on without completely losing control. The audience reaction said it all. Some people sympathized with Harry, sure, but many more were nodding along with Greg, agreeing with his points, seeing through Harry's act, recognizing the entitlement and the hypocrisy. This is the danger of building your entire public persona on being a victim. Eventually, people get tired of it. Eventually, someone asks you to explain yourself. And if you can't do that without falling apart, if you can't defend your choices without getting angry and defensive, then maybe your story isn't as solid as you think it is. Harry came on that show expecting another platform to share his grievances. Another opportunity to paint himself as the wrong party. Another interviewer who would nod sympathetically and never challenge his version of events. Instead, he got Greg Gutfeld, someone who doesn't care about titles or status. Someone who asks the questions viewers want answered. Someone who refuses to treat celebrities with kid gloves just because they have name recognition or tragic backstories. And it destroyed Harry, completely and utterly. He couldn't handle it, couldn't adapt, couldn't pivot, just melted down and ran away. That 39 seconds where everything fell apart will be replayed forever. It'll be studied as a perfect example of what happens when entitlement meets accountability, when someone who's used to sympathy faces skepticism, when a carefully constructed narrative meets basic logic. Greg didn't ambush Harry. He didn't trick him. He didn't treat him unfairly. He simply asked him to back up his claims and explain his contradictions. And Harry couldn't do it. That's not Greg's fault. That's not the media's fault. That's not the institution's fault. That's Harry's fault. His inability to answer simple questions, his tendency to deflect and blame others, his complete lack of self-awareness. The interview that was supposed to help Harry promote his latest project instead became a showcase of everything that's wrong with his approach: the victimhood, the entitlement, the inability to handle criticism, the emotional instability. All on full display for millions to see. Greg walked away from that exchange, looking better than ever, calm under pressure, fair but firm, willing to ask tough questions regardless of who's sitting across from him, a journalist doing his job properly. Harry walked away, or rather stormed away, looking like exactly what Greg said he was: entitled, unable to handle real scrutiny, more interested in controlling his narrative than having honest dialogue. The contrast couldn't be clearer. One man comfortable in his own skin, doing his job without fear or favor. Another man falling apart the moment his carefully crafted image is questioned. This is what happens when you build your life on blaming others. Eventually, someone asks you to take responsibility. And if you can't, if all you can do is get angry and storm off, then you've proven their point better than they ever could. Harry lost that interview the moment he lost his temper, the moment he made it personal. The moment he couldn't answer Greg's questions without getting defensive. Every word out of his mouth after that just dug the hole deeper. And the saddest part is, he probably still doesn't see it. He probably thinks he was justified in his anger. That Greg crossed a line, that he had no choice but to leave. But everyone watching knew the truth. This wasn't about Greg being unfair. This was about Harry being unable to defend his choices when actually challenged on them. Unable to maintain composure when someone didn't automatically take his side. Unable to have the honest, difficult conversations he claims to champion. Greg gave Harry every opportunity to explain himself, to make his case, to win people over with reason and facts. Instead, Harry chose anger and accusations and ultimatums. That's the real story here. Not that a mean host attacked a poor prince, but that a prince who claims to want accountability couldn't handle any when it came his way. A prince who talks about difficult conversations proved he's incapable of having them. Greg stood his ground, asked his questions, made his points, and let Harry reveal himself through his own reactions and words. That's good journalism. That's what interviews should be. Not softball questions and mutual admiration, but real dialogue, real pushback, real examination of claims and contradictions. Harry couldn't handle it. And in failing to handle it, he proved every single point Greg made about him. That's what makes this moment so powerful, so revealing, so absolutely devastating for Harry's carefully managed public image. In 39 seconds, everything fell apart. The mask slipped, the truth came out, and millions of people watched a prince throw a tantrum because someone dared to treat him like everyone else. That's the real story of what happened when Prince Harry sat down with Greg Gutfeld. Not a tale of media cruelty or unfair treatment, but a perfect demonstration of what happens when entitlement meets accountability and crumbles under the pressure.